Good day, everyone. My name is Anthony Mills. I'm the Executive Director of Global Innovation Institute. Glad to have you today here on our monthly webinar. For those of you who may be new to Global Innovation Institute, the Institute is the world's leading professional certification, business accreditation, and membership association in the field of innovation. We have certified people and members all over the world, in North America, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, and Asia. And we have a lot of great activity going on around the world through our partner network, training the program and working with individuals to get them certified. So it's an honor to have you here with us today. And this is our November webinar. And today we have with us our special guest speaker, John Hagel. So I'd like to introduce John to you. And after I introduce John, I'll give the floor to John to give his presentation. So John Hagel III has more than 40 years of experience as a management consultant, author, speaker, and entrepreneur. After recently retiring as a partner from Deloitte, McGraw-Hill published his latest book, The Journey Beyond Fear, which addresses the psychology of change, and based on which he is now developing a series of programs to help people navigate through change at many levels. John has also founded a new company, Beyond Our Edge, that works with organizations and people who are seeking to anticipate the future and achieve much greater impact. While at Deloitte, John was the founder and chairman of the Silicon Valley-based Deloitte Center for the Edge, which is focused on identifying emerging business opportunities not yet on the CEO's agenda. Prior to joining Deloitte, John was an independent consultant and writer, and prior to that, he was a principal at McKinsey & Company and a leader of their strategy practice, as well as the founder of their e-commerce practice. John has served as Senior Vice President of Strategy at Atari and is the founder of 2 Silicon Valley startups. John is also a faculty member at Singularity University, where he gives frequent talks on the mounting performance pressure created by digital technology and promising approaches for helping traditional organizations make the transition from a linear to an exponential world. He is also on the board of trustees at the Santa Fe Institute, an organization that conducts leading-edge research on complex adaptive systems. He has also led a number of initiatives regarding business transformation with the World Economic Forum. John is the author of the book, The Power of Pull, published by Basic Books in 2010. He's also the author of a series of best-selling business books, Net Gain, Net Worth, Out of the Box, and The Only Sustainable Edge. John is widely published and quoted in major business publications, including The Economist, Fortune, Forbes, Business Week, Financial Times, and the Wall Street Journal, as well as general media like the New York Times, NBC, and BBC. John has won 2 awards from Harvard Business Review for best articles in that publication, and has been recognized as an industry thought leader by a variety of publications and institutions, including the World Economic Forum and Business Week. John has his own website at johnhagel.com, and for many years wrote personal blogs at edgeperspectives.typepad.com, as well as contributing posts to the Harvard Business Review, Fortune, and Techonomy websites. He is active in social media and can be followed on Twitter at AJ Hagel, and on LinkedIn at LinkedIn/n/jhagel. John holds a BA from Wesleyan University, a Bachelor of Philosophy from Oxford University, and a JD and MBA from Harvard University. So with that, please join me in welcoming John Hagel as our guest today. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the perspectives from the book that I just published, as was mentioned, The Journey Beyond Fear. But I'm most of all looking to look forward to the questions and discussion. I really want to hear what questions it provokes and where you might even disagree with some of the perspectives that I'm offering. I'll say I started writing this book 3 years ago. And the 2 catalysts for writing the book, one was most of my business career has been in business strategy. I was taught to believe that strategy is everything. You have the right strategy, you win. And over the years, I've actually come to believe that psychology is much more important than strategy. That if we don't understand the emotions that are shaping the choices and actions of the people we're dealing with, the best strategy is just going to sit on a shelf somewhere. So that was one catalyst. The other was I was traveling around the world 3 years ago as part of my work. And I was struck that everywhere I went, the dominant emotion that I was encountering was fear. At the highest levels of organizations, at the lowest levels, out in the community, fear was the dominant emotion. And while I think fear is understandable, I think it's also very limiting. If we're feeling fear, we tend to become much more risk averse. We tend to shrink our time horizons, just focus on the moment. We adopt as a result a win-lose kind of mindset, zero-sum mindset where either I win or you win, but we can't both win. And as a result, there's an erosion of trust. We've become less trusting of others, and we become more isolated, wanting to do everything on our own. So I think it's a limiting emotion. It's an understandable emotion. And I should say here, I'm talking about fear of the future. What's our view of the future? Is it primarily threat or is it primarily opportunity? And so I think the fear of the future is understandable given the long-term forces that are reshaping our global economy and society. I've done decades of research on this. I've come to call it the big shift. And I think we're actually in the early stages of the big shift, even though it's been playing out for decades. But one of the consequences of the big shift is mounting performance pressure on all of us. It takes many different forms. Part of it has to do with intensifying competition, not just at the company level or institutional level, but at the individual level. I think more and more people are worried about, oh my God, when is the machine going to take my job? I'm in competition with technology for my work. So intensifying competition, accelerating pace of change, things we thought we could count on are no longer there. And then because of all the connectivity we've created on a global scale, a small event in a faraway place in the world cascades into an extreme disruptive event that disrupts our best laid plans. Dare I mention pandemic as just one example of the kinds of extreme events that are increasingly being encountered. So again, a lot of reason for fear. with competition, pace of change, extreme disruptive events, who wouldn't be afraid? But again, I think it's a very limiting emotion. And I would highlight, in my mind, one of the interesting paradoxes of the big shift, as I mentioned, is on the one side, it is creating mounting performance pressure on all of us. At the same time, on the other side, it is creating exponentially expanding opportunity. We can create far more value with far less resource, far more quickly than would have ever been imaginable a few decades ago. So interesting contrast, mounting pressure and exponential opportunity. The challenge, if you're feeling fear, is most of us who feel the fear can't even see the opportunities that are out in the future, much less have the motivation to pursue them. So my purpose in writing the book was to help people, first of all, acknowledge the fear, because I think many of us are unwilling to acknowledge that we are afraid of the future. We live in cultures where expressing fear is a sign of weakness. And so just acknowledging the fear that we have, recognizing that it is limiting, and then finding ways to move beyond the fear and cultivating emotions that will help us to have much more impact that's meaningful to us. So that's what motivated me to write the book, and the focus of the book is that journey beyond fear. And in doing the research, it's partly a personal memoir. I talk about my own personal journey, but partly it's about the research that I've been doing, again, for quite a while on various aspects of the changes we're facing and how to deal with those changes. But in the book, I ended up identifying what I called 3 pillars on the pathway from fear. And I'll talk a bit about each of them. The first pillar is narrative. The second pillar is passion. And the third pillar is platform. Now, the challenge that I face is those are three commonly used words, and I have very different definitions for each of them. And hopefully that there's a reason for that. I'm not just being contrarian, and I'll try to explain why I have these different definitions. But let me start with narrative. Again, here now, when I say the word narrative, everybody thinks I'm talking about stories. Stories and narratives, same thing, you know, okay, what's the story? No, I believe there's an important distinction to be made between stories and narratives. And at a high level, for me, a story is self-contained. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The end, it's over. And the story is about me, the storyteller, or it's about some other people, real or imagined. It's not about you. You can use your imagination to figure out what you would have done in that story, but it's not about you. In contrast, for me, a narrative is open-ended. There is no resolution yet. There is some kind of big threat or opportunity out in the future. And it's not clear whether it's going to be addressed or not. And the resolution of the narrative hinges on you. It's a call to action, to say your choices, your actions are going to help resolve how this narrative plays out. What's it going to be? And so in the book, I actually end up talking about narratives at multiple levels because I think they're relevant in multiple dimensions. The first level is, I believe we all have a personal narrative. And then I believe institutions or companies can also have narratives. I believe geographies, cities, regions, countries can have narratives. And I believe that movements can have narratives. And I won't go into detail on all of those, but just start briefly with the personal narrative, because I think that's where the journey begins, which is the process of just, first of all, stepping back and articulating, what is my personal narrative? What is my narrative? And here I hasten again to caution, in the psychology profession, there's a widely used term, personal narrative. And what they mean in the psychology profession is, tell me your story about how you got to where you are today, the choices you made, why you made them, and how you ended up where you are today. But that's looking back. That's a story. When I talk about personal narrative, my focus is on the future. And I have two questions. One is, what is your view of the future? Is it primarily driven by threat or by opportunity? And what threat or what opportunity is most compelling to you? And then the second question is, do you have a call to action to others to help you in addressing that future? At least in my experience, more and more people, as they step back and try to articulate the narrative that is driving their life today, their view of the future is driven by some significant threat that they see that's generating fear. And because of the fear, there is no call to action to others. It's all on me. I just have to make it through here and figure out how to address that threat, but it's all on my shoulders. And I think there can be a big aha moment as people begin to see what their personal narrative is today, to say, is that really the best personal narrative for me? Is it really going to help me to achieve the impact that's most meaningful to me? And start to look for what opportunity could be out in the future that could really excite me and motivate me. And how could I call others to help in addressing that opportunity? So I think there's a significant potential. I view this as a catalyst in the journey beyond fear, to start to recognize what's driving our fear and then finding an opportunity in the future that will really excite and motivate us. And I'll just quickly mention too, I mentioned the notion of corporate or institutional narratives. And I think there's a huge untapped potential here. Frankly, I've seen very few companies or institutions articulate a narrative the way I'm talking about it. Because again, it's not a story about the company, where it came from and how it addressed all kinds of challenges and accomplished amazing things. The corporate narrative I'm talking about is about the people you're addressing out in the marketplace and focusing on articulating a really inspiring opportunity that could motivate those people, and then have a call to action to them. What do they need to do to address that opportunity? And I'll just quickly give an example because I think it's one of the few that I've come across, but it illustrates the potential and power of a corporate narrative. It was Apple back in the 1990s. They had a corporate narrative that was condensed into the slogan of "Think Different." But if you unpack that slogan, basically the narrative was, for decades, we had digital technology that took away our names, gave us numbers, made us cogs in a machine. Now, for the first time, there's a generation of technology that can allow us to express our unique potential and individuality. But it's not going to happen automatically. You need to think different. Will you think different? It was a call to action to the customers. And it spoke to such a deep aspiration that so many people had, that I think it's the reason why, for many people, Apple became the equivalent of a religion. It built such a connection and such loyalty and such excitement that it led to significant success for Apple. And again, the interesting thing is that narrative was not about Apple. Apple was barely mentioned in it. It was all about the customer. What was the opportunity for the customer? What actions did they need to take? And by the way, it was not just buy our products. It was they needed to think different. So anyway, I think it's a big untapped opportunity in the business world, particularly in a world of fear. If we can find ways to excite and motivate customers based on a really inspiring opportunity in the future, I think we can accomplish amazing things. So I view narratives as a catalyst in the journey beyond fear. It can help us to really see the fear that is driving us, help us to reflect on what's that view of the future, and how can we start to articulate a view of the future that's more opportunity driven versus threat driven. So that's the first pillar, narrative. Second pillar, passion. And here again, my experience is if I'm in a room with a group of people and ask everybody to define passion, I get as many different definitions of passion as there are people in the room. It's a word that we use all the time, but we all have different meanings attached to it. And I want to be very explicit that I'm talking about a very specific form of passion. I call it the passion of the explorer. And I came across this because I was doing research, looking at, given the big shift and the mounting performance pressure of the big shift, I said, let's look for environments where there is sustained extreme performance improvement. What can we learn from those environments that would be helpful to everyone? And one of the things I discovered in looking at a very diverse set of environments was that all the participants in those environments where there was sustained extreme performance improvement had a very specific form of passion. And I've come to call it the passion of the explorer. And it has three components to it. The first component is people who have this passion have a long-term commitment to having increasing impact in a specific domain. They're committed to being in a domain and having more and more impact in that domain. They're excited about having more impact. Second element is what I call a questing disposition. People with this kind of passion, when they're confronted with an unexpected challenge, they get excited. This is an opportunity to have even more impact. How would I deal with this? How could I address this? what could I learn from this? And so I think it generates excitement. Then you've got the third element, which is a connecting disposition. And what this is when confronting these unexpected challenges, people with this kind of passion, their first instinct and reaction is, who else can I connect with who could help me get to a better answer faster? And so they're extremely well connected, constantly looking for help, very driven to ask for help. They don't hold back. So I think that this kind of passion can be a really powerful fuel to drive learning and impact and overcome the fear. If you can generate that excitement about an opportunity for more impact in a particular area, you might still be afraid. I should mention too, I am not in any way suggesting that we eliminate fear. And one of the examples I provide is I mentioned the environments of sustained extreme performance improvement. I spent a lot of time with extreme sports people, and one group, particularly in my area, big wave surfers. And it's really interesting when you talk to those big wave surfers and they're paddling out to ride the next big wave, they're afraid. They know that not only could they fall off their board, but they could actually die. People have died riding these big waves. So there's fear. But guess what? They're still paddling out. They're still going to ride that wave because they're so excited about the opportunity to do something that had not been done before. So I think it's very powerful. Now, the challenge here is, or there are many challenges, but one of them, I did a survey of the US workforce, all industries, all geographies, all levels and companies. And based on that survey, the best estimate that we had of how many people who really have passion of the explorer about their work, it's at most 14%, 14%. 86% do not have this passion. And I actually think it's surprising there are as many as 14% who have this passion, because we have created large institutional environments that are very hostile to passion. Passionate people ask too many questions. Passionate people take too many risks. They deviate from the script. Why would you want a passionate person? If you have passion, keep it at home, make it a hobby. But when you come into work, just do the assigned task reliably and efficiently. And so I think, again, a longer discussion, but I've got a strong view that we all as humans have the potential for this passion of the explorer. There are some people who say, oh, there's only a small group of people who can be passionate. Others just want to be told what to do and get the security of an income. I believe we all have that within us, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be drawn out, and that will be much more fulfilled as we find that and pursue that passion. So it's, again, I think it's an untapped opportunity. When I talk in the large business environments or institutional environments in general, one of the common themes today is worker engagement. Virtually every large organization measures worker engagement. Do we have engaged workers? And again, definitions can differ, but broadly what they mean is, do you like the work you do? Do you like the people you work with? And do you respect the company you work for? That's an engaged worker. And there's certainly evidence that says that an engaged worker performs at a higher level than non-engaged workers. But there's nothing in that definition, nothing in that focus about the excitement and drive to accelerate performance improvement and to drive change to be able to have more impact. In fact, my experience is actually engaged workers often resist change. You come to them and say, the world's changing, we need to change what you do. reaction is, wait a minute, I like what I do. I like the people I'm working with. Don't try to change. The passionate people are driven to change. They're constantly seeking change that will help them to get more and more impact in the areas that really matter to them. So again, I think it's a really powerful fuel that can help drive us in that journey beyond fear. If we can find ways to cultivate in ourselves and to cultivate in others, that if we're in a work environment, to have this kind of passion, we can start to accomplish things that would have never been imaginable in the past. So again, a big untapped opportunity, and a key mission for me in this work is to help leaders to see the importance of passion, the need for passion, and find ways to cultivate and draw out that passion. And I'll just say here that, I mean, there are many things the leaders can do in cultivating passion. I think one interesting shift that I talk about in terms of leadership is, if you look at the mark of a strong leader today in all of our institutions, the strong leader is someone who has an answer to all the questions. No matter what question you have, you can count on the leader to have an answer. And by the way, if they don't, maybe it's time to get a new leader. I believe in this big shift world that we're heading into, the mark of a strong leader will be the one who has the most powerful questions and who will freely acknowledge that they don't have an answer and ask for help. And I think, again, in the context of passion, really inspiring questions can help draw out the excitement of people that say, wow, that is an interesting question. Imagine what we could accomplish if we could answer that question. And it communicates to the organization, number one, questions are not only okay, they're necessary. We need more questions. And that it's not only okay, but necessary to ask for help. But asking for help is a key to getting to better answers to questions. And again, that helps to draw out the passion of people and help them to overcome fear if they can ask for help. So anyway, I think big opportunity to cultivate more passion within ourselves as individuals and within the people that we're working with and living with. So that's a key second pillar in my book, starting with narrative. Narratives can often be a catalyst to opening up the passion, because you're starting to see an opportunity that really excites you in the future. And then the passion becomes the fuel that helps to drive you into that future and connect with others in the process. And that leads to my third pillar, platforms. Again, everybody talks about platforms today. I mean, you can't pick up a newspaper or publication without somebody talking about platforms. Again, I have a very different focus here, because most of the platforms that we have today, in my view, fall into two categories. One category is aggregation platforms. They are helping to facilitate short-term transactions. Classic one is buying and selling products, connecting customers and vendors. Short-term transactions. Second kind of platform has to do with social platforms, helping to build relationships with friends, family, broader networks of people, but it's all about supporting relationships. There's a third kind of platform that I believe is still yet to be really developed and has huge opportunity attached to it. And it's what I've come to call learning platforms. Now here, again, I have to define terms, because when I say learning platforms, most people think, oh, you're talking about Udemy or these other virtual video workshop or class platforms where you can sign up for a course. No, that's one form of learning, but that form of learning is sharing existing knowledge. I believe in a world that's more rapidly changing. Most powerful and necessary form of learning is learning in the form of creating new knowledge that never existed before. And the only way to do that is not in a classroom or training room, it's through action with others, confronting unexpected new situations. And my view is there's an opportunity to create platforms where the primary design goal, not just the side effect, but the primary objective you're seeking is to help all the participants to learn faster through acting together. I don't believe we have those platforms yet. I believe there's a growing unmet need in a rapidly changing world for those kinds of learning platforms. And I won't go into a lot of detail here, but again, it draws on some of the research I've done around learning in the form of creating new knowledge. And what I've found is that no matter how talented or smart you are as an individual, you're going to learn a lot faster as part of a small group. I call them impact groups, but typically they are between 3 to 15 people. And the key here is developing deep trust-based relationships with each other, where you are constantly supporting each other as you confront these unexpected situations and things don't work. We're here to back you up. But at the same time, constantly challenging each other. How can we get to even more impact? How can we get to the next level of impact? And so I think it's an interesting combination of support and challenge that helps to drive people to learn faster. And again, a lot of things, I've developed a whole framework of the practices that these small impact groups can cultivate and develop to learn faster. But I think done in the right way, they can really help to intensify the passion of the participants, that when they're surrounded by people who share their passion for achieving more impact in a particular area, the passion gets deeper and deeper and more intense. And so in developing these learning platforms, my view is the core unit on the learning platform are these small groups. How to create shared workspace environments where these small groups can come together and interact with each other on a regular basis. And then how do you connect these small groups into broader networks on the platform so they can learn at scale and drive exponential learning over time? I think it's again something that I'm looking for and actually hoping to create. I should say that my intent in writing the book was to create a new center that will offer programs based on the book. So I've talked about narratives, passion, platforms. I want to create programs that will help people on framing their narratives, cultivating their passion, finding and developing these learning platforms. And so that's my next chapter in my own life in terms of where to go from here. I'm hopeful the book will just motivate people to want to make the journey, but then find ways to help support them on that journey. But I think that, again, at the end, the journey, I believe, is really important and necessary. I think it's starts with the recognition of the fear that we're increasingly feeling and being willing to acknowledge the fear, but then to focus on these 3 pillars. Narrative, how can we frame narratives that will help to excite us about opportunities in the future? Passion of the explorer, second pillar, how can we draw out that passion within us that will help to motivate us to overcome, to move beyond the fear and achieve much more impact on a continuing basis? And then how can we create learning platforms where we can all come together as we develop this passion and pursue these opportunities to have exponential impact? And again, I'll just come back at the very end here to something I mentioned at the beginning around the big shift. On the one side, mounting performance pressure. On the other side, exponentially expanding opportunity. I believe we are in a world of exponentially expanding opportunity that has yet to be seen, much less really addressed. And so again, that's the purpose in my book, is to help people make that journey beyond fear so that they can pursue those exponential opportunities. So let me end there and see if we provoke some good discussion.
Thank you so much, John. I think, yeah, that's great points. I have a few, there's some questions we'll get to here in the chat box. Before we do that, though, I had a couple of questions for you, while others are working on thinking of questions and so forth. But I really wanted to bounce off what you were saying, and I think you made some excellent points. So here's my question is, in my work, we talk a lot about shaping the future or future shaping. In other words, being very explicit about the future, not just sitting around and waiting to see what the future will hold for us, what it will bring us, but actually trying to take hold of it and own the future. So it sounds like you're talking about sort of the same thing when we're talking about narratives and these platforms. It's the narrative is about us being explicit and shaping our future and taking hold of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, it actually taps into a whole other stream of research that I didn't cover in the book or the presentation, but I've become a big proponent of what I call shaping strategies. And I think that a key issue here is, in a rapidly changing world, there's a natural tendency to fall into a reactive mode. Just sense and respond as quickly as you can to whatever's going on. That's the key to success. I believe in rapidly changing worlds, there are more degrees of freedom to shape the future in ways that can be helpful to us and to others. And how could we take the initiative to shape that future versus just react and respond to whatever's coming our way? Again, it's that sense of agency that we can and should make a difference as the future unfolds.
Yeah, and I think, really, I think crafting the narrative, like you talked about, is an expression of having that sense of agency. It's an expression of our intent to shape the future by really expressing what our narrative is. So I think those fit very, very well together. The other question I had was, we talked about the passion of the explorer. And I see this, you talked about how many traditional organizations really don't like the people who are passionate, because they rock the boat and they ask questions and they challenge things and they're the maverick, and that's absolutely true. But I think there's some organizations who they understand the role of the maverick, the passionate person, and so they set up venues and ways to try to tap into that. I think of organizations that have innovation centers, and the innovation centers are really as much about learning, particularly for the really long term. They're about learning as much as about producing something, and helping the organization learn so they know what to do in the future. What is their shaping strategy? So I think that fits in really well in organizations that are constantly doing relentless experimentation. I looked at, for example, I think Amazon does a great job of this. They're relentlessly conducting experiments and trying to learn. So how do you think that these innovation centers with relentless experimentation fit into the passion part?
Wow. Well, I'm a big cynic about innovation centers on so many levels. The first level is, by creating an innovation center, the implication is everybody else should just focus on their work. No innovation. It's all being done at the innovation center. That's where the innovation is. No, I think every worker should be innovating every day of their lives. And by creating innovation centers, and frankly, again, I'm very cynical about this. I live in Silicon Valley, where there are a lot of innovation centers that large companies have set up. And the message that those innovation center leaders have is, we're going to give you some money and some people, go out and do some interesting things, but don't ever come back. Because if you come back, we're going to kill you. And so they got the message.
Yeah.
They're staying far away.
Yeah.
And they're doing all kinds of fun, interesting things. And it gives the company a chance to do PR. Yeah, we're innovative. We have an innovation center. Go visit it. Wonderful. No, sorry,
No, that's fine. I'm thinking too of centers that are really there to exist for the whole workforce. So like, for example, Google Garage, anybody that works at Google can go, use the garage and experiment and do stuff. I mean, these are very entrepreneurial places where anyone can go tap into them. Those type of centers too. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm generalizing, and again, when you say innovation center, that typically
Yeah.
is a facility that's actually quite distant from the main
Right.
company.
Yeah. I'm thinking of also like a resource for everyone to use.
Yeah, no, and again, I think one of the interesting things I talk about in my work in terms of how to stimulate people to be more passionate and exploring is to create experimentation platforms everywhere in the company. Call center operators, janitors in facilities. Where can you go to experiment about new ways of doing things to have even more impact in your work? And we're going to create these platforms that will reduce the risk that's attached to failure. If you fail, you're not going to bring down the company, but you'll learn. And it's a powerful message that experimentation is desirable and that everyone should be doing it, not just people in research labs or innovation centers.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. Everyone should be doing experimentation every day. Trying. So here's a question from our audience. One of the dispositions you talked about, I think, was a questioning disposition. So the question is, what are some actions that an organization can take to foster this questioning disposition amongst their teams?
I think, again, I don't want to say it's easy at all. It's a profound cultural shift because, again, questions in most large institutions today are deeply suspect. It's a sign of weakness. Go read the manual. Everything's in there. Just read the manual and do your job. And I think that questioning disposition, it's, again, I mentioned the leaders. It starts with the leaders asking powerful questions, setting an example. But it also can be just this notion of narratives and corporate narratives, for example. If you can articulate for the customers a really exciting, inspiring opportunity that they need to pursue, it stimulates questions from the workers of, well, how can we help them? What could we do to help them get even more impact in addressing that opportunity? And again, I think it's within the teams, within the small, I'm focusing on what I call impact groups. But I think, again, a whole set of practices in those impact groups. One of them is investing the time and effort to make sure that everyone is aligned around what is the outcome that is most meaningful to us. Because if we all agree on what's that outcome that we're trying to achieve, and by the way, it's not just a one-time outcome, it's something that can be significantly expanded over time. Then when we start questioning and challenging each other, we're doing it with mutual respect. I think today in large companies, if you challenge someone, you're doing it to put them down and advance your own agenda within the company. No, in these impact groups, you're doing it with mutual respect because you all have agreed this is a really powerful and important and exciting outcome that we're trying to achieve. What are the questions that we could ask to get to better and better outcomes? So.
And I think you made a good point too. I mean, it starts with the leadership setting the tone for this. And I think, leading by example, but also in leading by example, creating clarity that there's psychological safety for people to ask questions and so forth. So thinking about your learning platforms, do you think that organizations should try to set up learning platforms inside of the organization and use those as a vehicle for creating new knowledge?
Well, it's certainly a starting point. I think you can start within a company, but I think it's also something that could extend out. One of my favorite quotes is Bill Joy, who a Silicon Valley entrepreneur who once made the observation. He said, just remember, no matter how many smart people you have within your organization, there are a lot more smart people outside your organization. And so if you're really focused on learning and just limiting it to the people within your organization, you're never going to learn as fast as those who reach out, build relationships, networks, connections to a broader set of talent and insight that can be drawn into these learning platforms. So I think yeah.
That makes sense. To really, obviously having a foot in your organization, but having many tentacles out into other places, outside, really is probably going to make for the most powerful platform. And actually, one of our participants here today, he noted this. There's some platforms you see in the innovation space that are used for facilitating relationships between organizations that have needs and organizations that have solutions. It's an approach toward open innovation. The examples are given were Innocentive and Nine Sigma, and they work like a knowledge transfer platform, or I would think of them as a solution transfer platform. But they're online platforms where knowledge providers and solution providers can interact and improve the solutions for organizations' challenges. And in that case, it's probably mostly technological knowledge that's being exchanged. But do you think that sort of fits into the types of platforms you're thinking of?
To some degree. I mean, I hesitate because I am actually extremely familiar with Innocentive in particular. And they're very good at posing challenges or questions and then rewarding whoever comes up with the best answer. Mm-hmm. But it's very transactional. Again, I'm defining a specific question, come up with an answer. And once you got the answer, job done, meeting over. No. The learning platforms I'm talking about, as soon as we answer one question, there's another question on the table. And we're doing it as part of small groups that have deep trust-based relationships with each other. Innocentive, I mean, it's interesting to observe over time, they've actually been a catalyst for some of these small groups to form because people trying to answer the questions that were being posed realized that they could be much better at answering the question if they were part of a small group than if they were just individuals trying to figure it out. So, but it wasn't a design goal, and it's not a key factor in the platform. It's how do we build long-term trust-based relationships with each other around a continuing quest to get to more and more impact in particular domains. And so
that sounds like a slightly different flavor of a platform, one that is more relational and relationship oriented and long-term and ongoing. So thank you for clarifying that. One of our other participants today asked the question, can you define the term creating knowledge? How do you learn by creating knowledge?
It's unfortunately very context specific. So it's the notion that we are increasingly in a world where we're confronting situations that have never been confronted before. And finding ways to address those situations to have impact that nobody had thought about, that has not been part of our knowledge. We're creating new knowledge, and the knowledge is about action and impact. What action can we take to get more and more impact in areas that matter? And so that's the focus in creating knowledge. It's continuing through action to learn. I mean, you fail in many cases, but you also succeed, and you reflect on the failures, you reflect on the successes, and you find ways to take another round of action that's going to have even more impact.
Okay. One of our other questions is, should there ever be a break in the innovation we're pursuing?
A break?
Yeah, stop innovating? I don't know. I mean, is there any
coffee break?
No, I just mean a break in the flow of innovation.
Yeah, well, again, I think it's an interesting paradox is in this big shift. It is a period of exponential change. The change is going to accelerate, not slow down. It's going to accelerate. And so taking a break, good luck. You better run back in at some point because the world will have changed quite a bit when you took your break. And so I want to be respectful in some respects. I mean, one of the things that I talk about in the context of the passion of the explorer is that one of the phrases that I keep hearing from people who have this passion is that we're running a marathon, not a sprint. And what they mean by that is their commitment is to have increasing impact over the long term. not just in a short sprint. And they realized that if they just focus on a short sprint, they could burn out. It could be just too overwhelming, and they crash and get sidelined. No, we're here for the marathon, and so we're balancing ourselves. We're not being overwhelmed and burnt out by the innovation and challenges that we're addressing. We're excited about it and we're pursuing it, but we're creating space for rest and sleep and whatever that we need to make the next journey. So
you also made another important point. There is a shift, though. I mean, because a lot of organizations, when they talk about innovation, really what they really mean is just incremental short-term innovation. And you mentioned the fact of being very long-term oriented about this. And I think that is a shift in our mental model a little bit, to think about it's not just incremental innovation. Sometimes we actually may need to let go of some of that and really focus on what's the next, evolution of our whatever we offer, what's the next version of that, and for example, I work a lot with telecommunications regulatory agencies around the world. And we were talking about 5G, and I'm like, okay, well, are you working on 6G yet? What about 7G?
Yeah.
Are you thinking about these things? You're like, no, but Hawaii is, right? They're working on 6G. So I'm like, I'm always asking what's next, what is the lifespan of each one, and I think it does, having such a platform really does transition our mental model and our mindset to a long term. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely, again, in my view, one of the keys is taking that long view of the future. It's not just, what am I doing this quarter or this year? It's where's the world headed, and what's the big opportunity that I can really be focusing on and addressing? And
Right.
that's
So one more question our audience had was, well, the question they posed was, how do you get everyone to speak the language of innovation in the workplace? And you could even say the language of transformation, the language of evolution. But let's go with that. The language of innovation. How do we get everyone talking the same language?
Well, frankly, it's again, I'm going to be a bit cynical here. I don't believe it's about language; it's about action. How do we act in these ways versus just say the words and have the same meaning? I'll just say as an aside, one of my big frustrations these days is, in addition to innovation, we're talking about transformation. And in my experience, every large company has a digital transformation program. I guarantee, you tell me the company, they've got a digital transformation program. When I really probe in to say what's the program, what are you doing? It's basically taking digital technology and applying it so they can do what they've always done, faster and cheaper. And the metaphor I like to use for transformation is moving from the caterpillar to the butterfly, a totally unrecognizable new entity. And just helping the caterpillar to run faster, that's not transformation. That may be helpful to the caterpillar, but please don't call that transformation. Again, we're using these words to excuse ourselves from having to do the hard work. And again, innovation centers, they can do it. Transformation programs, we have those. So I think it's much more around really seeing how the world is changing. Again, I think one of my key, when I deal with leaders in institutions, is helping them to really see how the world is changing at such a rapid rate and the requirements to really be successful in that world. Mm-hmm. And that it's about action and impact again, rather than just, speeches about innovation and transformation.
So one of our audience members, Peter Farrington, would like to pose a question. Peter, why don't you ask us your question?
Yeah, hi, Anthony and John, you can hear me?
Yes.
Can hear you. Can't see you, but we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Let me try and put the video on too then, if you prefer that. So here I am.
Excellent.
So you can see where I express my passion behind me.
Yeah.
I took the Genie course with Anthony about 2 years ago here in Dubai. And that was part of a whole process for me to understand where I believe this whole innovation, the root of it is, and that's for me, creativity. Without the idea, you can't innovate. And I think like what you were suggesting, that ideas don't come when you're in a state of fear. You usually have one or two choices at best. And when I'm looking now, I'm leading towards my question here. We've got COP26 dealing with climate change happening in Scotland right now. And I look at the quote unquote narratives coming out of there, and it's the same kind of narratives we've been hearing for 50 years, which is fear-based, it's fear-mongering. And we end up in the same situation without a proper solution, without any kind of progress towards actually, if you want to call it, innovating our ways out of this sort of situation. And just to use another example, so I'll be asking for a comment from you, an observation based upon what you said. I looked at the World Government Summit report that came out earlier this year. I can't remember the title of it, but it was essentially the world leaders saying, this is how we should move from here on in, given the impacts of the pandemic. And so what I did was I took I don't know if you know Dr. David Hawkins, he wrote this book called Power versus Force. It's basically consciousness raising words versus consciousness lowering words. In other words, fear-based words or love-based words. So actually I did a word count using these words in that report. And not surprisingly to me, as a minimum, it was a 2-to-1 ratio of fear-based words compared to, let's say, empowering words. So from my perspective, the narrative continues to be fear-based oriented. Our state of consciousness really goes against the type of passion I think you're talking about. So what can we do?
We only have 1 minute left, so if you can.
Okay, sorry. So what are your thoughts about COP26? What advice would you give to our world leaders right now?
Yeah, you're hitting on an important topic. I have a whole chapter in my book on narratives for movements. I've studied successful movements throughout history, and the key finding from those movements is the movements that have been most successful have had opportunity-based narratives that inspire and excite people, motivate people to action. And then secondly, they're organized in small groups, cellular structure. But I think in the context of your question, one of the issues I see with movements around the world today is they're all driven by threat-based narratives. The enemy's coming to get us. We're all going to die. We need to mobilize now and resist. That feeds the fear. And again, my view is the way to get the most impact and the most innovation and creativity is by finding opportunities that will excite people. So how can we reframe climate change into what is the opportunity? If we could, in fact, get climate change to occur, what would the world look like? How could we prosper and flourish in that world? That's something that's missing. So, and Anthony, I want to be conscious of time, but yeah.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Peter, and thank you, everyone. That does bring us to the top of the hour, and I appreciate everyone's questions and this discussion. It's been an incredibly enlightening discussion and conversation, and I just want to thank John again for his time and providing us with his, sharing with us his insights, his time, for giving that today. And with that, we will wrap it up, and I just want to thank everyone for attending, and we'll see you at our next webinar in a month. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.